Alright guys, such a good to be back again today. I hope you're enjoying your Wednesday so far, and today I want to talk about this really interesting Toronto Ultra situation with Classic not being in the starting lineup anymore, it looks like. We've talked about this Toronto team a while ago with Looney supposedly not being allowed to go home during the whole pandemic situation. Now we have to have some more discussions surrounding the Toronto Ultra management. What exactly is going on here? Why is he out the team, and why is he talking about on Twitter that he's got set up, presumably, by the management staff at Ultra? And what does this make it look like for future players that might want to join that team? Like, you know, who's going to want to join Toronto Ultra with the bad PR like this? So, like, if you guys enjoyed the video, subscribe if you're new. As always, I would greatly appreciate it. Quick note on the draft buff draft royale. I appreciate there's a load of different ones right now on there. I put official in the one that I set up. The draft buff guys set up their own one for me, so we were slightly misaligned on this. But I'll make sure that next event, it's only one tactical draft royale, so you guys know which one to join. But you can join multiple if you want. That, of course, is completely okay. So let's talk about this Classic situation. A few days ago now, Cronut CDL Intel comes out with Classic is out for personal reasons. Pac-Man confirmed on stream when it looked like Cleanix was playing instead of Classic. As a roster change, I suppose well, it makes sense for Cleanix to come in. You look especially at Awakening now at Florida, Mac on the New York Subliners, Pristini on Chicago Huntsman. Bringing in this fast-paced SMG player, like cracked out young talent, seems to have worked for a lot of teams so far this season that have made roster changes. Cleanix, of course, is probably the best option if you are Toronto Ultra's management for bringing in someone to the team. However, Classic being the change seemed a little bit wrong, given that Classic had probably been their second best player this season behind Methods. You could argue he was the best player this entire season given his role. Definitely one of the most improved players this entire season based on Black Ops 4 performances. So yeah, it was interesting, but then it comes out and says, okay, it's for personal reasons. Classic will be back in coming days. But to me, it felt kind of strange because yes, he was coming back, but he came back just before the last weekend's Minnesota event. Now, you know, as Adam Adamu here says, you know, sincere condolences of Classic. So clearly there were some obviously awful family issues that Classic was having to deal with. But supposedly, as Crowder said on the callcast we'll look at just in a second here, they weren't allowing him to scrim from home. I imagine a professional Call of Duty player has got multiple setups in multiple locations. If he traveled back to see his family, you would imagine that he would be able to just hop on and scrim with the team, especially a few days before the event when he was planning to still return by the time the event kicked off.
Sorry, Chris, what were you going to say?
So right now, the reason why Classic is not playing, from my knowledge, is he went home to visit his family in New York. And with him not being in Toronto, he was not allowed to scrim with the team.
Wait, what? It's on. We have the internet.
What?
You heard what I said. That's all I know.
We have internet.
Pretty interesting, right? It seems like Ultra won't let players scrim when they're outside of Toronto for whatever reasons, despite this individual here at the Toronto Ultra saying his condolences. Apparently they won't let them scrim with the team outside. So we got even more interesting, the fact that when Classic did return, they just chucked him straight back into the starting lineup, right? You've been scrimming with Cleanix for a few days. Supposedly it's been going pretty well. Maybe the team is finding a little bit of a comfort zone, but Classic comes straight back into the starting lineup pretty much the day before they begin the Minnesota home series, what turned out to be a pretty difficult group, right? So this was their results. They lost 3-2 to LAG, but of course an LAG team that can beat anyone in Game 5, as they did to Chicago Huntsmen to knock them out later in the tournament. Then they lost 3-0 to Chicago, but obviously a pretty tough group they ended up having to play in with Classic just back into the starting lineup, and they put up a pretty good fight against LAG, to be honest, and could have won this series definitely on another day. Maybe with Cleanix they do win this series given they're more well prepped, right? I think Classic, you know, really the only bad map he had the entire weekend was pretty much in this first one against the Toronto Ultra, and you look at his stat line here, courtesy of Cam Allen, linked to this spreadsheet down below. But yeah, that's pretty much fitting on screen. Classic with a 0.93. Like, you know, he was a very respectable performer this entire weekend, to be honest, given the situation that he found himself in. This was very strange to me that they brought Classic back into the starting lineup literally the day before, when they could, I suppose, have just played with Cleanix, given they'd been practicing him for a few days, and if it didn't go well, then bring Classic back. So, of course, now we get this situation. Cleanix is back scrimming with Toronto for Classic, so it almost echoes really the Seattle Surge situation where they bring Enable back for a little bit, play one series with him, and he's out the door again for the rest of the season. Seems like Classic has almost been set up to fail, really, by the way this whole weekend situation has been run, and maybe you can't blame Toronto Ultra management if Cleanix was doing better in scrims, but it just seems a very strange decision to me for Classic to be brought back into the starting lineup to then be removed when they have a bad weekend against a very good group, as it turned out. So yeah, we can see that Clinix is now back in the starting lineup here, and this is what Classic tweets. So a couple of days ago now, absolute joke, he says, then follows it up with this one, it got set up, and I presume he's talking about the management here, because that is what it seems like, right? If you're going to be brought back into the starting lineup, we're not scrimming with them for a few days, have a bad weekend, because, you know, you have a difficult group, and you haven't had much practice time over the last few days they've been playing with Clinix, then you obviously don't do well in your group, you go out of the tournament in 8th place, then you get removed off the team, right? Like, surely there could have been something done a little bit better here, especially given Classic's, I'm sure, difficult personal situations that he have to deal with. Now he's got dropped off the team, and clearly a lot of the pro players are not very happy with this, and it's obviously not good PR for the Toronto Ultra, right? Because we look at some of these replies, Temp says unbelievable, Zek says, Zach Sedenya, over here at Paris Legion, we pray for you, such a garbage situation, hope things turn around for you, you know, like, they don't want to see you winning, you're better than all of them. So loads of people replying to this one saying, like, you know, what is going on here? Because Classic's a really likable guy, to be honest, especially within the pro community. And Slack then comes into the mix one. I can't believe my guy is pined. Wow, absolutely mind-blowing. Joey says, truly disgusting. Best player on the bench. So yeah, clearly, Pro's not very happy with this situation, and it's really intriguing to me how Toronto just can't seem to get anything right now. Then again, when we look at this starting lineup now with Clinix, maybe it is a step in the right direction. However, it just seems a strange player to remove off the team if you are going to make a change, in my opinion, and all the baggage that comes around it as well. This isn't really a good look, to be honest. So let's look at their starting lineup right now. Seems like Classic is out and Clinix is in the squad. Happy that Clinix is getting his chance. I think definitely this squad, if they want to compete, if they want to improve like an LAG seems to have done this past weekend, they need to make some sort of roster change. Pretty much all the teams that have improved this season and got significantly better at some point have made a change to make that happen, and most of it has been bringing in either a fast-paced player or a cracked out young talent. Basically the same thing, but Saints on LAG, you know, obviously a very veteran player, to be honest. But yeah, Classic out, Clinix in. It makes sense for Clinix to come in, but just the change is a little bit strange in my opinion. Like, Methods obviously has to stay. Metals has been a great player for them since they brought him back. So I suppose if you are going to make a change, like Cammy, Bats, or Classic was one of the three that could have gone. In terms of performances, like, it's tough to choose between the three, but I feel like Classic's been very well improved. And obviously, being from Europe, I like to see Cammy and Bats in the squad. But, you know, I'm not going to argue that Bats are, you know, pretty inconsistent. Maybe Cammy's been slightly better. You could argue that, you know, Clinix for Bats could have been a change you could consider. Like, there's other changes that are available apart from Classic, so maybe he feels like, given he had this personal difficulties, they've kind of picked on him as an easy target to get rid of, given he was out the team for a bit and then he had a poor weekend. So with all that being said, does this team improve? Maybe. I think that Clinix, Cammy, and Bance is a very deadly SMG trio if they were all on their game, but if Classic's on his game and maybe Bance wasn't in the team or Cammy wasn't in the team and Clinix is there as well, maybe the team still has a slightly higher ceiling, right? And a veteran player like Classic on the squad, yes, Bance is a veteran player as well, but, you know, Cammy's not been around too long. Maybe that would help a player like Clinix out get into the groove of the team, rather than just having Methods really as the one who's played for a number of years. So it really is a very interesting situation. Intrigued to hear your thoughts on the entire saga down below, and how will they do this weekend, because they're playing again at this Paris Legion home series, playing up against Atlanta, OGLA and New York in their group. So of course Atlanta are going to be a tough matchup. They haven't really been looking themselves lately, so wouldn't be surprised if they could take this series somewhat to the distance. I think that Clinix seems to be a great talent. You know, we saw him on the Singularity squad last season, if you guys don't really remember the name, the World Championships, where Singularity were just mopping up Team Envious. Clinix was just a world star in Aches and Co on that, what was it, Arsenal Hardpoint. So yeah, Clinix obviously very talented individual, and literally that one series he plays picked him up onto the squad. Now he's getting the starting chance in the starting lineup, and you know, playing up against Atlanta in the first series of the tournament, that's going to be a difficult one. But the group is, to be honest, relatively doable, I suppose. Like OGLA and New York, these aren't easy teams by any means. To be honest, I would say that like all these teams apart from Toronto are maybe like top 6, which actually is a very difficult group when you think about it like that. But OGLA and New York are certainly beatable, especially if you can take them to a game 5. But it's just not an easy start for Toronto, right? So I do wonder what their going forward plan is really with this squad. Like, if they don't have a good weekend here, what's the plan, right? Are they going to do a Seattle and say Classic's out for the rest of the season? Are they going to bring him back? Are they going to make more roster changes? Because when you've got a 10-man bench lineup, you can make a lot of roster changes, but really you want to have a consistent lineup from now to the end of the season, so you get a lot of practice, get a lot of chances to get better with your squad, as I'm sure the Florida will do, as the New York will I imagine continue to do going forwards. So maybe this will be the team they stick with for the rest of the season, but it's not going to be an easy group to show their worth. And if they do manage to do it, then that's very impressive indeed. The final thing I wanted to discuss here was this a couple of weeks ago that came out from Shotzzy. Granted, Intel only saw this relatively recently, but he talks about buyouts, right? And this is always an interesting question because esports more generally and Call of Duty especially, it's an interesting place for the amount of money that is on the line right now, not just for championships, but also the amount of money that has to be put down to buy some of these premium players. And Hastro said a while ago, 27th of April, I think this is when they won their tournament in the Los Angeles event. We paid a pretty insane buyout for the right to contract with Shotzzy. Watching him this weekend, I feel like we made a damn good deal. I'm sure that opinion of Hastro has improved ever since. Now, Shotzzy says on stream, and I'll play the clip in just a second, what his buyout was rumored to be, what he thinks it kind of was. Of course, he wasn't, I'm sure, fully involved in the contract situation with Spice from last season because came over from Halo and all that stuff.
Can you tell us how much they buy you out of your contract for Halo? I'll give you an estimate, or like a bit, like an estimate, but I'll give you like the baseline when it was around. I'm pretty sure it was around like 150 racks, 150,000 to like 250,000.
But then Scraps hits the reply, what's actually the highest ever? How big was yours? I forget. Wasn't it rumored to be 100k or was that fake news? Imagine Big bought out for 100k. My one from FaZe, because he was on FaZe last season, to London Royal Ravens was like triple that. So implying it was like $300,000 Scraps' buyout to this London team. I know this London team, like the Richt Global, they have a lot of cash going on, but there's a lot of organizations in this position right now, and hopefully, at least I hope, that the CDL has shown to some investors this season that it can be a viable option. I think that especially in comparison to the Overwatch League right now, CDL looks like a much better bet, and of course, Overwatch as a game is kind of dying, whereas Call of Duty, there's always a new one every year, so even though that has its pros and its cons, to be honest, it does mean that CDL's longevity is maybe higher than a game like Overwatch. I could certainly see that being an argument. Of course, we're kind of biased on this channel. But I know there are definitely some other investors out there that are in similar positions with an awful lot of money that are kind of sitting back and seeing how the CDL is going to play out and then potentially buying it as well. So, you know, who knows which kind of amateur players we might see picked up next season if there is some extra franchises brought in. Then again, you can't go to like 13 teams or 14 teams really. You kind of have to jump it up to 16. So whether they can find 4 more teams that are willing to invest. Of course, Activision sold the spots pretty much this year for 25 million. I don't know whether that valuation will go down with the pandemic and everything going on right now. Esports and other industries in a difficult spot. So, you know, who knows whether they'll have to put the price down a bit, whether other investors will be able to, or willing to at least put that money up. Maybe the game will be better next year, so we'll be in an even better spot for the CDL. But the amount of money flying around with these guys is crazy. And as someone pointed out yesterday when we talked about Scump, you know, and the whole fines and Octane getting fined, all this kind of stuff, you know, they're making so much money, they don't really care about these fines if they're a few hundred quid or whatever they are. And it's good for us, right, because we get the Twitter entertainment. So yeah, intrigued to hear your thoughts on all these topics down in the comment section below. Like if you guys enjoyed the video, subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.